Hello, everybody, and welcome to Stress, Hormones, and Health with Depke Wellness. I'm Glenn Depke, a traditional naturopath, or as others refer to me as their adrenal expert. Before we get into today's presentation, I just want to bring up a couple of housekeeping items for you. Number one, just make yourself comfortable. We're going to have about a 20 to 30 minute presentation to go through today. And the other really important thing is to make sure that you have a pen and paper handy, because there are likely points throughout this presentation where you're going to want to take some notes, because this is going to apply directly to you. So first I want to discuss what you're going to learn today. You're going to learn how stress affects your adrenal glands. So the stress of your overall life, whether it be mental, emotional stress, or stress of infection, or injury, or inflammation, or perhaps even chemical or environmental toxicity. We're also going to discuss the stages of adrenal stress. Just because we have stress, not everybody is in the same place, and there are certain progressions, and knowing those progressions is really of utmost importance to getting your health back on track. We're also going to get into how stress hormones affect your health in general. Most people don't have a deep understanding of how this affects the body holistically, and you're definitely going to get that information today. And we're also going to discuss what to look at regarding hormones. There's many misconceptions about hormones these days, and we're going to set that record straight today as we go through this presentation. And also, and really sometimes most importantly, how do you get back on track? So first we're going to look at the stages of adrenal stress. Now as we look at this chart today, the line that we're following throughout this chart is a measurement of cortisol. Now, cortisol is your primary stress response hormone. Now, this is going to respond to any level of stress, as I mentioned earlier. I'm going to repeat this because it's so important. This could be, of course, mental and emotional stress. But beyond that, it could be the stress of either injury to your body or inflammation in your body, perhaps infection in your body. And it could even be some form of environmental or chemical or heavy metal stress to your body. And so what happens though is when your body is dealing with the stress response, it affects cortisol. But as you're going to see with this slide, it affects it in many different ways. Now, when we're looking at this, let's start by looking at the bottom. And look on the bottom right where it says failure. All right, just so you're clear, adrenal failure is synonymous with death. If you have zero function in your adrenal glands, you're not going to be alive. So obviously throughout my career, and I've looked at this point, well over 5,000 adrenal saliva test kits throughout Depke Wellness, I've obviously never seen anybody in adrenal failure. But when we look on the bottom left where it says normal, so this would be optimal functioning adrenals, I've only seen 5 out of that over 5,000. So what's interesting here is that I'm basically, with people with health challenges, because that's who I'm seeing in my practice. Just to go on a little tangent here quickly, I don't have people walking into my practice and saying, "Hey, Glenn, I'm rocking my health on every level. Can you look at my adrenal function?" I wish that would happen, but it really doesn't. So the people who come into Depke Wellness, they typically have a health issue. So what this 5 out of over 5,000 tells me is that if you have a health issue on any level, there's approximately only 0.1% chance that you would have healthy adrenal function. So since I've obviously seen 0 people in adrenal failure and only that small percentage in normal or what I would consider optimal functioning adrenals, then most people are somewhere in between the two in either a stage 1, a stage 2, or a stage 3 adrenal stress. Now, stage 1, as you can see by the picture you're looking at, as you can see that the cortisol levels are elevated. And again, that's the reactionary state to any form of stress. And just always remember, cortisol is your primary stress response hormone to any of the levels of stress that we mentioned earlier. But what's important to understand within stage 1 is look at where that the solid line becomes a dashed line. When it becomes the dashed line, that's a time frame in your life when you begin to burn out something that's known as your HPA axis. Now, from the technical perspective, that stands for your hypothalamus, pituitary, and adrenal axis. But I really don't want to be technical about this. To break it down simply is really of utmost importance. So to break down that HPA axis in the most simple way that's what brings your body back into a deeper state of balance after a stressful event, situation, or time frame in your life. And think about it. From the reality, we're all stressed out, right? I am, you are, everybody we know is. We have stress throughout a somewhat consistent basis throughout our lives. But if you have a healthy HPA axis, which is tied into healthy adrenal function, what's going to happen is you're going to have stress, and then your body will bring you back into a functional state of balance with this HPA axis. And then you have more stress, then you have back into functional balance, then more stress and back into functional balance. But the challenge comes in is when you can begin to burn this HPA axis out, instead of dropping into a functional balance after stress, your stress just becomes a cumulative stress, which then not only has a major impact on your adrenal function, you're also going to see how this has a major impact on your body across the board as we go through this presentation today. Right now, once you hit that peak of the stage 1 and the HPA axis begins to burn out, now you're going to drop into the next level of adrenal stress, which is stage 2. Now in stage 2, what's interesting is your total cortisol level for the day, like if we're looking at this from a testing perspective, will actually appear to be in the reference range. But in stage 2, you will have certain times of the day, maybe one, maybe more than that, where you don't have enough cortisol to even really live into optimal function in your body. And we're going to address what that means in the next slide. And then stage 3 is basically when the bottom just also starts to fall out on this whole process. In stage 3, you have low cortisol, typically throughout most of the day, if not all of the day. Your total cortisol level will be very low, and many other secondary hormones will be very low also. Many of you have heard of the hormone DHEA, and most have heard of female hormones such as estrogens or male hormones such as testosterone and many different hormones on that level, but they're all going to be affected in that stage 3. And of course, we want to catch this long before you reach adrenal failure. So those are the stages of adrenal stress. Now after that, we want to understand how stress affects your body. And now that's this, and I'll tell you right now, this slide is the aha moment for most people that come through the doors at Depke Wellness. The middle circle, where it says cortisol to DHA ratio, basically is just your adrenal function. Every circle outside of that middle circle is directly tied into your adrenal function. Now, if we look on the bottom right, where it says your cortisol ratio is going to tie into the function of your pancreas, your thyroid, and for women, their ovaries. Now, going around clockwise, your adrenal function also plays a direct role in your metabolism of fat and protein, which is going to play a big role in protein turnover, as well as weight and fat distribution. This is whether you need to lose or gain weight. And also the mucosal surface integrity, which is the interior lining of your nose, your mouth, your esophagus, your entire gastrointestinal tract, and for women, the vagina. And this is basically anywhere where your body is easily exposed to the outside environment. So it's really the very onset of your immune system function. It's basically like the Marines of your immune system. So obviously that has a high level of importance. Now again, continuing to follow this around clockwise, your adrenals play a role in every level of detoxification in your body. And the reality is we live in a toxic world, so we need this to really be in a heightened function on a regular basis. So that has a high level of importance. Now just above that, there's a trilogy between your adrenal function, your immune regulation, and your pro and anti-inflammatory states. And this trilogy is probably the single biggest challenge that I see with anybody living with any level of a chronic health issue. And really to recognize, if you're living into either inflammatory states or immune system challenges, there's always a significant and deep adrenal issue that goes along with it. And now just above that, your adrenals play a direct role in glucose homeostasis, or the simple way to put that is blood sugar balance, which is essential for your brain function. How many times do people experience throughout the day where, just seemingly out of nowhere, they have this like hypoglycemic reaction with their brain where you just can't think straight. Maybe you can't remember a name or something you were going to do, or you just have this overall like brain fog come over you. Very often that's tied into a lack of proper blood sugar balance. Now also, your adrenals play a role in cellular energetics. So it's energy at the most basic level, and honestly, who doesn't want more energy nowadays? Right now, to the right of that, your adrenals will play a direct role in your musculoskeletal health. So this is bone and connective tissue turnover as well as muscular integrity. And really think about it. Who's going to guess that maybe the reason why you were diagnosed with osteopenia or osteoporosis is because you have poor adrenal function? It's never really discussed. And as far as the muscle integrity is concerned, while it's obviously normal to have sore muscles after going through a really hard workout, or maybe you're up and down in the garden all day and you don't typically do that, but it's not normal to have muscle aches and pains from just general life, situations, right? So very often this is tied into adrenal function, right? And then lastly, the circle on the upper right, your adrenal function will play a direct role in the quality of sleep and mood, also your memory and learning, and your overall neural connectivity, which is basically your brain and your autonomic nervous system, which is the master regulator of everything. So the big question I can ask you right now, and just write this down on your pad of paper, so you know what your answer is. When your adrenal function is off, so when your adrenals aren't working optimally, based on looking at this slide here today, what's off in your body? And I'll give you a second to write down your answer. Now, if you wrote down everything, you're absolutely right, because that's what we're looking at when reviewing the slide. Your adrenal function will impact basically every level of function holistically within the rest of your body. And that's why it's so important to address adrenal function. And what's interesting with this, as a side note, from a conventional medical perspective, they don't even really acknowledge adrenal insufficiency or adrenal fatigue. So this is an area that you really have to look at from a holistic perspective and really address with somebody you would consider more of a natural health practitioner rather than conventional medicine. Now, the next thing we're going to look at is what to look at regarding hormones. Right now, the first thing that I know you might be thinking when you look at this slide is, wow, that is overwhelming, right? And yes, it does look overwhelming. All the big words on the page and the arrows pointing everywhere and all these, it really looks confusing. But honestly, I'm going to make this very easy for you to understand. Now let's start by looking in the upper right. In the upper right, you see where it says B5. So that just represents vitamin B5, typically in the form of pantothenic acid or sometimes panthenine. Now your body takes vitamin B5 and it converts it. You can see the arrow pointing to the left. It converts it into a coenzyme referred to as acetyl-CoA. Right now, your body uses that acetyl-CoA and your own production of cholesterol as the two raw materials to produce the very first baseline hormone in your adrenals, which is called pregnenolone. Now, we'll think of the pregnenolone as the mother hormone of every other hormone produced in your body. Right now you can see that there's then two different pathways for this mother hormone to go down. And now the one pathway that goes straight down is from the pregnenolone through a hydroform, eventually goes into what's known as DHEA, that's bolded right below that, and then it goes into different forms of end result hormones. So different forms of androstenedione, different forms of testosterone, and different forms of estrogen type hormones. And so now this pathway is what I refer to as a general health and balance pathway. So if you want to maintain general health and balance, you need all these hormones. And from different levels, between males and females, because obviously women don't have testes to produce testosterone, so women depend on adrenal function to produce testosterone. And also men don't have ovaries to produce estrogen hormones. So as men, we depend on adrenal function to produce our estrogen hormones. And then when we talk about women that are postmenopausal, there is a high level of dependency on adrenal function. And for men past andropause, there is also a high level of dependency on adrenal function. Now, one of the little side notes I want to make as we look at this, because if you think about it from a postmenopausal perspective for women, the big challenge with women who have symptoms postmenopausally is not because they are lacking a progesterone cream or an estrogen cream, to be honest with you. And honestly, that can create many more challenges than it could actually provide you from a relief perspective. But the real problem here is for women who enter menopause in a state of adrenal fatigue or adrenal exhaustion. Because postmenopausally, when the ovaries aren't producing the hormones that the body has become accustomed to through the years, that's when that pressure or that ability is then referred to the adrenal function. So that's one of the missing pieces for really any woman who is actually suffering from postmenopausal symptoms, is to make sure that you address and balance your adrenal function. Right now, when we look at the other pathway, where it goes from the pregnenolone, you see those red arrows pulling down. Now, don't get me wrong, this pathway still plays a role in general health and balance, but this pathway is your fight and flight pathway. Right now, when you have any kind of a stress response, as I mentioned earlier, any of those levels that we talked about earlier, from emotions and to infection, injury, inflammation, chemical or environmental, heavy metal toxicity, any of those levels, your body's going to pull hormones down this pathway. So it goes from pregnenolone to progesterone, down through a couple other conversion forms, and eventually into your primary stress response hormone, which is cortisol. And when your body is dealing with inflammation on any level, that cortisol actually gets converted into cortisone, which is your body's primary anti-inflammatory. Yeah, so another question here for you is, if your body is in a stress response, right now, thankfully, most of our stress responses aren't truly life or death, but the body still basically perceives our stress as life or death. So if your body has to make a choice between saving your life, whether it's really true or perceived, or general health and balance, write down on your sheet of paper which you believe it's going to do. So is it going to prioritize saving your life, or is it going to prioritize keeping you healthy and balanced? And I'll give you a moment just to write that down. All right, so for anybody who wrote down that your body's going to prioritize saving your life, you're absolutely right on. Yeah, because what good is it going to do to be healthy and balanced if you're not alive, right? And that's the factor that goes on, and that's what's called then the pregnenolone steal, because many of us stuck in these stress responses all day. There's so many people that from the time we wake up in the morning until almost the time we go to bed, we're in this fight or flight response. And what's going to happen then, we're going to pull all the pregnenolone down the pathway to produce cortisol and cortisone, which then leaves us in a depleted state of going down the DHA pathway, which then affects our general health and balance. And in long term, this just blows out the entire system that we're looking at here. Yeah, so obviously you can tell by just these 3 slides how essential it is to address your adrenal function. All right, now with this, I want to talk a little bit about what you can do, and this is where I'm going to want you to take some notes here. And I purposely didn't put this on a slide because I want you to really comprehend this on a deeper level. And when you're listening to me and you're actually taking a note and writing it down, we're engaging multiple levels of how your brain works, and you're going to comprehend this in a much deeper level. Yeah, so we're going to talk a little bit about some of what we do in the 21-day Depke process to feel young again. Yeah, so these are the notes that I want you to take for yourself. Now, the first thing with addressing your adrenal function is to know where your adrenal function is. So from that standpoint, with these 5,000 plus test kits that we've looked at here at Depke Wellness through the years, with literally thousands of individuals, as I said, over 5,000, we always use an adrenal saliva test kit. Right now, that's really, to my level, that's essential, because if you look at blood only gives you a snapshot of where cortisol is in the moment you're taking the blood. Whereas when you look at adrenal saliva testing, you're getting an understanding of an overall reflection of where your stress levels are based on hormones, and you're getting this through many times of the day. You would actually be making collections in the morning, noon, afternoon, and evening, and you would have an understanding of a full day's process of where your hormones are. Now, the other really a high level of advantage with this is when you look at saliva, and we're looking at also secondary hormones. So hormones such as estradiol, estriol, testosterone, progesterone, and even also melatonin. It gives us deeper understandings of where these hormones are in your body. And if you happen to be one of the women on either a progesterone cream or an estrogen cream, or perhaps a man on a testosterone cream, what this will also actually help you understand is if you're even absorbing those creams vascularly. Because what I've seen through the years is very often As an example, I'll give you the most extreme example I've seen through the years. I had one woman who was using a progesterone cream for some time, and this woman was postmenopausal, and she should have had a progesterone level between 5 and 95. And we looked at her adrenal saliva test results. Her progesterone level came back at over 46,000. So that you didn't hear me wrong. Over 46,000. It should be between 5 and 95. And that's because for that particular woman, as happens with so many women, she wasn't absorbing this vascularly. So it wasn't getting into her blood. So when her doctor was looking at blood, everything looked normal or even low. So, and when it looked low, the increase of the progesterone cream would be recommended. And all that was happening is this is building up in her fat tissue. All right, now that's not as near as big of an issue though for, let's say, a woman who's using an estrogen cream. So you don't want to be actually using a cream with a buildup of estrogen in your tissue in your body, because obviously that's going to be a risk factor for breast cancer, and nobody wants to add that risk factor to their life. And then even for men who are using a testosterone cream, I see this with regularity, where a man will go into a practitioner and they'll measure testosterone because he's complaining about challenges with poor motivation, fatigue, weight gain, and maybe a lack of sex drive. And then they'll be put on a testosterone cream, and they might even feel some benefits to it, or maybe no benefits. But I can even think of one case recently where, again, this was a testosterone level that should have been somewhere between like 70 and 110. And when we looked at it with the saliva testing, that particular gentleman was well over 300. So these are things that you really don't want to be happening in your body, because it creates significant imbalances. Right now, once you actually understand where your adrenal function is, then the next thing I want you to write down is it's important to address this properly. And by addressing it properly, from the perspective of us here at Depke Wellness, again, who we've worked with thousands of people, helping them balance their adrenal hormones and their hormone imbalances overall, we always work at the top of what's going on. We always work at the vitamin B5, the pregnenolone and DHA levels, but we also always use particular liquid sublinguals in the levels that are really just there to help your body balance itself. Because when you balance in the way that I'm discussing today, this is not a dependency for the rest of your life. As an example, when women go on estrogen or progesterone, it's typically a lifelong thing. Or men who are going on testosterone, they're going to be taking this for many years, until they just simply at some point just decide to stop. But this has a beginning and an end, because basically all we're trying to do is help your body bring its adrenal function back into balance and reset that HPA axis that I talked earlier about. And once you get back into balance, guess what? You get to stop the supplementation. So that's something that's very important. And again, it's essential that you're working with somebody who knows what they're doing, knows which test to use, and you really want to be careful about which testing. That's why we only use the gold standard in the industry for adrenal testing. And also, you really want to be able to work with the correct supplements, and with people who really know what they're doing from an adrenal level. Right now, another thing that I want you to recognize is that, and I want you to write this down next, is that the next key is to get to the bottom, get to the core of why you have adrenal issues in the first place. All right, so here's just some examples that you can maybe write underneath that. These are different reasons why people's adrenal function basically blows out. It could be mental, emotional stress. It could also be food sensitivity. It could also be infection in your body, and we find most often that these are gut infections, so these are tied into your gastrointestinal tract. So this could be infections such as parasites or protozoa or amoebas, entamoebas, detrimental bacteria, and such. It could be heavy metal toxicity or environmental or chemical toxicity, or one of the big ones is also inflammation. And so when you wrap all this up, it's not only just recognizing the different stages of adrenal insufficiency, it's not also just understanding how this affects your body as a whole, and to understand what's really going on from the hormone perspective. But it's also understanding the need for testing to see where you're at, knowing how to address it properly, and lastly, getting to the core, getting to what caused this in the first place. Because even if you bring your adrenals into balance, but you haven't addressed what caused it in the first place, well, obviously you're going to end up back in the same issue somewhere in the near future. And that's what we do address at the 21-day Depke process to feel young again. And with that, I just wanted to say that I really would like to thank you for taking the time out of your busy day to listen and watch this presentation. And I trust that you got some valuable information from this today. And I look forward to helping you at some point in your future. Thank you so much.